Thank you for following along with the Revelation series online. For the week that I'm going to have to cancel class because I'm going to be out of town, I'm going to have you watch this video that follows by Professor Shane Wood from Ozark Christian College. I took this video from his website and then re-uploaded it so it could be in this playlist. So just wanted to give credit to him and where this source can be found. You can see it on your screen there at www.shanejwood.com. He's going to talk about the rapture and his position, which is essentially my position, in that there is no rapture. At least not how we think of the rapture. So without further ado, here is Professor Shane Wood.
Some of you may be shocked at this point that we're in session 10 and I have not one time mentioned the word rapture. Some of you may find that, comforting. Some of you may find that very pleasing. Some of you may be borderline enraged. A lot of times I'll get the question, what about the rapture? What do you think about the rapture? And usually my response is, time's up. I guess we need to go. But since we're at videos, I can't do that because I know the time's not up because I can see the clock over to my left. So we'll deal with the rapture, and this is my basic answer. I'll give you my answer, I'll give you a couple seconds to get mad, and then I'll explain why my answer is what it is. Okay, here's my short answer. What about the rapture? I don't believe in it because it's not biblical. Hopefully that gave you enough time to be mad. Now let me explain why. Here's the two reasons why I do not believe in a rapture. The first reason is because of history, and the second reason is because of the Bible. So let me deal with the first reason. The history of the rapture is pretty fascinating because even though here in the 21st century, it's one of the dominant understandings of the book of Revelation, of what it should deal with, of how the world will end, the fascinating reality is the very first time in the history of the world that the concept of the church being pulled out of the world, either before, in the middle, or after a time of tribulation, the very first time that was mentioned was in 1830 by a woman named Margaret MacDonald. She was from the United Kingdom, and she put herself into a self-induced fever, a trance-like state, so that she could have a prophetic utterance. And in this trance, she ends up communicating the idea of the church being pulled out of the world as things were getting bad, as tribulation was beginning. I know this because actually I have in my office, I have a copy of Margaret MacDonald's letter that she wrote in this prophetic trance. But for 1800 years before this, no one had even heard of a rapture, or even the idea of the church being pulled out of the world. But in 1830, Margaret MacDonald gives this prophetic utterance, and a guy by the name of John Nelson Darby catches wind of it and ends up putting theological muscle around this idea. For 6 times over the next couple of decades, he would come from the United Kingdom over to America, bringing this rapture theology, establishing and working with a group known as the Plymouth Brethren, who were teaching this new theology, this new rapture teaching. John Nelson Darby left such a vast legacy that eventually, through the work of the Plymouth Brethren, and as it began to expand, it influenced a man by the name of Cyrus Scofield. You might recognize his name, because at the turn of the 20th century, one of the most popular Bibles that was selling at the time was the Scofield Reference Bible. Some of you may have Bibles like that NIV Study Bible, or at the top you have the Word of God, and at the bottom you have notes that help you understand and interpret the inspired Word at the top. The problem is that many people forgot to distinguish what was at the top from what was at the bottom. And the Scofield Reference Bible was the very first study Bible, and people loved it. But in those footnotes, underneath the Word of God, Scofield talked about this rapture theology, and as the Bible sold, so did the rapture theology. Also around this time, one of the most influential evangelists of the early 20th century was known as Dwight L. Moody. And Dwight L. Moody believed in a rapture, and everywhere he went, he would establish churches teaching this rapture theology. Eventually, it influenced a guy by the name of Billy Graham, who in the 1970s wrote a book called Approaching Hoofbeats, where he talks about this rapture theology. Now, I will say Billy Graham has recanted since then, but in the 1970s, I mean, if Dwight L. Moody is the best evangelist in the first half of the 20th century, Billy Graham's kind of hard to beat in the second half. Also in the 1970s, a book by the name of The Late Great Planet Earth by Hal Lindsey was published. And worldwide in the decade of the 70s, this book outsold the Bible. And then in 1988, we had a guy that published a small pamphlet-like book called 88 Reasons Why the Rapture Will Happen in 1988 that was wildly popular, only to be followed up by 89 Reasons Why the Rapture Will Happen in 1989. That's convenient. In 1990, a guy by the name of Tim LaHaye and his friend Jerry Jenkins publishes this fictional work known as the Left Behind series that sells, the first book alone, over 63 million copies in the world. And that's how, in 180, 190 years, something as brand new can become the dominant position of the church in the Western world. But here's my hesitation, here's my red flag. If it's only been around for 180 years, that doesn't mean it is false, but it should at least give me pause. Because if it's only been around since 1830, that means that the rapture was not talked about or known by Thomas Aquinas, Augustine, Justin Martyr, Martin Luther. It kind of has some problems. It doesn't mean it's false, but it does mean it's pretty new, which is at least somewhat of a red flag for me. The second reason, though, why I reject the rapture is because of this. The Bible just doesn't teach a rapture theology. We're going to look at three major texts that every time you hear about the rapture, these three texts will be close at hand. Matter of fact, you've probably even heard of some of them. Matthew chapter 24 is the first one. Verse 40, you've probably definitely heard this. 2 men will be in the field. 1 will be taken, the other left. Rapture. 2 women will be grinding with a handmill. 1 will be taken, the other left. Rapture. You heard that one? Now here's the problem. It's probably going to shock you whenever I say this. My response back is, but shouldn't we read those 2 verses in context? Is that a shock? I told you I was going to say it like 100 times in these sessions. Context. Let's just read 4 verses before. Go back to verse 36. But about that day or hour, talking about the second coming, about that day or hour, no one knows. Not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. Let me just stop right there and say this. This verse is what compels me a lot of times to go to churches and plead this one simple thing. Stop predicting. Please, stop predicting the second coming. It is absolutely foolish to try to outdo Jesus. I mean, he flat out says, about the day or hour, I don't even know. I've had people even say to me, well, we may not know the day or hour, but we can know the month and the year. Are you kidding me? You think that's really what Jesus is saying? Come on. Here's the reason why I say stop predicting. Number 1, it tries to outdo Jesus. Why do that? Number 2, every prediction has one thing in common. They've all failed. There's a pretty famous one. May 21st, 2011, Harold Camping. I know that date because May 22nd is the date that the tornado ripped through Joplin. But May 21st, Harold Camping had made this prediction that the rapture would happen that day. I have a missionary friend in Zimbabwe. He said, do you guys have the billboards that, say the rapture's coming May 21st? And I was like, yeah. He goes, we don't even have cell phones in Zimbabwe, but we have a billboard from Harold Camping saying the world's going to end May 21st. He had thousands of people following him. Thousands of people cashing in their 401ks, cashing in their retirements to pay for these billboards. I mean, what do you need a retirement for if you're going to be raptured out, right? May 21st comes and goes, and nothing happens. So Harold Camping does what all of the prophecy experts do, and he says, I forgot to carry the 1. It's going to be in October. October comes and goes, and nothing happens. Here's why I'm bringing this up. He had thousands of followers before the prediction, and after the failed second one, The last I heard, his church was down to 12, and I don't mean 1,000. And most of those people didn't just go to another church. Most of those people completely rejected this entire idea, because if we keep getting the second coming wrong, we probably also have the first coming wrong too. Stop predicting. It's not helping the cause of Christ whatsoever. Frankly, we have a lot more work to do in the present than merely hide out in our predictions of the future. But Matthew 24:36 should at least be on some level of caution. About the day or hour, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. As it was in the days of Noah. Notice what he's doing. He's saying, I'm using the Old Testament to teach you something about what's going to happen. He says, as it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. For in the days before the flood, people were eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage up to the day Noah entered the ark. Now, the tense or the number of each of the pronouns are very important. Here so far, when it's talking about people, that's plural. People were eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage up to the day Noah, singular, entered the ark. That's important for the context because of this next verse. And they knew nothing. Who's the they? The people that are outside the ark, that are eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage. They knew nothing about what would happen until the flood came and took them all away. Here's why this is important. In the days of Noah, the good people were put in the ark and the bad people were not. They were left out. And whenever the flood came and swept away the evil, the good people were left on the earth, right? Remember, this began by him saying, for as it is in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. For in the days before the flood, the people were eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage up till the day Noah entered the ark, and they knew nothing about what would happen until the flood came and took them all away. That is how it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. Did you hear that? That is how it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. What? That the evil will be swept away, but the good will stay. Then right after that, the evil swept away, the good stay, he says, 2 men will be in the field, one will be taken, the other left. Who's taken? Well, if it's like the days of Noah, the evil are taken and the good stay. 2 women will be grinding with a handmill, one will be taken, the other left. Who's taken? Well, if it's like the days of Noah, the evil are taken and the good stay. Here's one of my key problems with the rapture. They have the wrong people leaving. The good aren't taken out of the earth. The good stay. It's the evil that are pulled away. Read the verse in context. But hey, you take the Bible out of context, you can make the Bible say whatever you want. You leave it in context, and it might even challenge some things that you hold very near and dear. Oh, let's look at another text. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. That's a big one. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 13 through 18. It's actually the Latin version of this particular text, is where we even get the word rapture associated with this idea of going up into the air. Because in English, that word never appears in the Bible. But chapter 4, verses 13 through 18 of 1 Thessalonians, we must keep it into the context of verse 18. Verse 18 says, therefore, whenever we come to that, I teach my students, whenever you see a therefore, you always need to ask, what is it there for? It's a climax, it's a conclusion. It's been building an argument that leads to this key point. Therefore, verse 18 says, encourage one another with these words. Whatever it is that he teaches in verses 13 through 17, it must be something that encourages the people of Thessalonica. We cannot take it away from the first century and throw it into the 21st century. It must be speaking to them at least first, because we're overhearing a conversation, remember. In verse 13, it says, brothers and sisters, we do not want you to be uninformed about those who sleep in death, so that you do not grieve like the rest of mankind who have no hope. Here's the context. The church in Thessalonica has Christians that are dying. Christians that are dying before the second coming. And the question is this: if they die before Jesus comes back, do they just miss out? Do they not get to go to heaven? What happens to them? And Paul says, whoa, we need to talk. He says, I want to talk to you so that you're not uninformed, so that you grieve like the rest of mankind who have no hope beyond the grave. He says, for we believe that Jesus died and rose again. And so we believe that God will bring with Jesus those who have fallen asleep in Him. Notice what He emphasized there. He says, I know you're worried about your loved ones that have died, but they're actually in a better position than you. Because when He comes back, He will come back with those that have fallen asleep in Him. According to the Lord's word, we tell you that we who are still alive, who are left until the coming of the Lord, will certainly not even precede those who have fallen asleep. You notice the emphasis? He's saying this, listen, your loved ones that have died, your loved ones that maybe even have taken a stand in the face of the Roman persecution and maybe even were killed themselves, we will not precede union with Jesus first. They will be there first. They're even in a better position than you. Verse 16, for the Lord Himself will come down from heaven with a loud command, so much for a silent rapture, a loud command, with the voice of the archangel and with the trumpet call of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. Your family is first. After that, we who are still alive and are left will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. Oh, and that's where people say, Rapture, I knew it. Okay, hold on. Let's keep it in context. If this is talking about an event that would happen 2,000 years away from the time of Thessalonica, from the time that Paul wrote this letter, how would it encourage them if they read this to each other? Remember verse 18. Encourage one another with these words. It must impact something that they're experiencing right then. If their loved ones have died and they're worried not only that those loved ones may miss out, but maybe they will never be reunited with them, all of a sudden you read it through that lens and verse 17 comes a lot more clear. After that, we who are still alive and are left will be caught up with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. Let me tell you, they're not thinking of a rapture. They're thinking of hugging their loved ones that have died but are coming back with Jesus at the end of everything. As a matter of fact, the very next phrase says, and we will be with the Lord forever. It's not like we're going to go hang out for 7 years and then come back down. No. As a matter of fact, the Greek word apantesis is the word that we have for meet. And the word that we have for meet is a word that means when an emperor is coming into your city, you don't let him get all the way to the city gates before you go out and meet him. No. What you do is you go out way far beyond the city gates and you meet him and you join his parade as he comes all the way back to your city. That's the word that is used here. Paul is saying this. I know you're worried about your loved ones that have died, but I'm telling you, they're actually already with Christ right now. They're there first. But when He comes back, we won't even have to wait for Him and them to get down here to earth. He will allow us to meet them in the air, to embrace them as we join the procession back down to earth, because we're still going to use this place. And in that context, verse 18 makes perfect sense. Therefore, encourage one another with these words. Become emboldened that you can lay your life down for the gospel, because if you do, you win. Like Jesus, you win. It's not about prediction. It's not about some future rapture. Matter of fact, the very next verse in chapter 5, brothers and sisters, about times and dates we don't need to write to you, for you know very well that the day of the Lord will come like a thief in the night. That's the very next verse. Times and dates? I mean, listen, it's kind of one of those things where we're trying to predict the rapture. Here's what's weird about it. Why is it that the concept of Jesus' second coming is always referred to as a thief coming in the night? Can you predict how a thief, or when a thief's going to come? I mean, can you predict when a thief is going to come and break into your home? No, you can't predict it. It happens unexpectedly. There are no signs. There's nothing you can do to predict it, but you can prepare and be ready for it. And that's the emphasis of this text, and frankly, even Matthew 24. Matthew 24 ends at the end of 24 and into 25 with four parables that say this. You don't know when He's coming, so stink and be ready. You have no idea when He's coming. So quit trying to predict. Just be ready so that when He finds you being faithful. Prediction gets us off the hook. Prediction obscures what it is the message is trying to say. The problem is the rapture is not to be predicted, but the rapture itself is not even testified in history or in the Bible. Let me give you one last passage. A guy by the name of M.R. Dahan says Revelation chapter 4:1 is the most clear reference in the entire Bible to the rapture. And my response to him is, that's my problem. That's my problem. Listen, this is their rapture passage. After this, I looked, and there before me was a door standing open in heaven. And the voice I had first heard, who is the I here, by the way? It's John. How do I know? Revelation 1:9, I, John. And the voice I had first heard speaking to me like a trumpet said, come up here, and I will show you what must take place after this. Did you hear the rapture? I'm supposed to believe that the come up here that Jesus spoke to John is actually the church leaving the earth and going to heaven. The problem is I would have to ignore pronouns, I would have to ignore the commands, I'd have to ignore the experience, I'd have to take it out of the first century into the 21st century, I'd have to ignore the context. Listen, you pull the Bible out of context, you can make it say whatever you want. But you leave it in context and it's saying something a lot bigger. As a matter of fact, whenever I read John 17, which is Jesus' prayer right before he dies and resurrects, in John 17, verse 15, Jesus specifically says, my prayer is not that you take them out of this world, but that you protect them from the evil one. I mean, if the church is really the hope of the world, how does it make any sense that whenever things get bad, you take the good news away? The church always shines whenever people are in the most distress, because we serve a wounded healer. We serve someone that knows what it's like to be in the darkness, to be in the suffering, to be in the pain, to feel alone. And if a tribulation was in the future, that would be the time when the church would shine the brightest. Why take us out before then? One of the other reasons why I think that this exploded over the past 180 years, especially in the Western world, especially in America, is because it turns into a theology that kind of serves us. I mean, who wants to go through suffering? Who wants to go through pain, especially for your enemies? It's pretty convenient to say that before things get bad, the church will be taken out. But how do I say that the tribulation is still yet to come, that the rapture will happen right before a future tribulation? How do I say the tribulation is not here with a straight face to the underground church of China? How do I say that there's a future tribulation, just not a present one, to the Christians and my friends in Haiti? Or to my Christian friends in Iraq or in Iran? How do I say with a straight face to the Coptic Christians who were beheaded on the banks of Libya, tribulation's yet to come? It's a convenient theology when the worst persecution that you have is taking Merry Christmas away from the door greeters at Walmart. But the history of the world, the history of the church, is one saturated with the blood of the martyrs. The tribulation has been raging since Jesus hung on a cross. And there is not some future thing that we are going to be able to escape some suffering. The more that we are obedient to Christ, the more that suffering comes. It kind of goes with the territory. Be taken out? That's the very prayer of Jesus in Gethsemane. And God's response was, even in the midst of your pain, trust me. Trust me.